Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hello, I'm Matthew Hall, and I'm with Ori Schwartz, the head of the OECD's Competition Division. Mr. Schwartz is a lawyer who has worked in private practice and held senior roles at the Israel Competition Authority and the Israel Ministry of Health. As head of the OECD's Competition Division, Mr. Schwartz oversees the OECD's work promoting sound competition enforcement and pro-competitive regulatory policies and supports the OECD's Competition Committee. Mr. Schwartz, Ori, welcome to our Curious Amalgam.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for joining. Shall we start with, what are the OECD's Competition Division's recent major accomplishments or initiatives that you've been looking at?
Mm-hmm. So if you don't mind, I'd like to say a few words at the beginning of the OECD more generally for those listeners who may not know. So the OECD is an international body. It has 38 member countries. So unlike other international bodies, it is an organization which is owned by its member countries. And the agenda of the organization is set by the members. The goal of the organization is to serve the members. The organization deals with many, many different policy areas. We used to say everything but defense and culture. I'm not sure we can say that about defense anymore because defense is becoming
gets mixed into everything else.
Yeah, more and more of an issue.
Yeah.
But you have work which is done on kind of more economic issues like competition or tax policy or corporate governance or investment. At the same time, you have work on more of a social issues like education and health and labor and so on. The OECD works in a very unique form. You have committees. Committees are basically groups of experts, usually public officials, civil servants, coming from their capitals to the OECD. So we have a group of peers from many different countries around one table, and we in the OECD serve different committees. My role in the OECD is to serve, I had a team that served the Competition Committee, which is basically a group of typically heads of competition agencies from OECD member countries, sometimes other countries, that come together twice a year in Paris to discuss different issues of competition policy and enforcement. Our members set our agenda, but we prepare the discussions. We write the background notes that support the discussion, bring the experts, and facilitate the conversation. One last thing, we also, perhaps one of our key roles is best practices, what we call recommendations. We support convergence in competition policy. And last year, as an example, we had a new recommendation on merger control. So 38 OECD member countries agreeing on principles for merger control.
Must be fun to negotiate amongst 38 countries.
Well, it's not bad.
So the 38 countries are presumably spread around the world.
Yes.
And is your work then meant to cover only those countries, or do you produce recommendations for everyone, if you like?
So we believe in inclusiveness, in reaching out, and we invite others, like-minded countries, to join our conversations. For example, in the Competition Committee, we now have 3 additional member countries who are not OECD members, but for the purposes of the Competition Committee are just as members, which is our Brazil, Romania, and recently also Ukraine. So we believe in an inclusive approach. We hope that our recommendations are stronger the more countries adopt them.
Okay.
To your question.
Yes.
I think the one word that everybody has in mind at the moment is AI. And we've been doing a lot of work on particularly AI in recent years, generative AI. And the way we looked at it is can divide it into 3. So first, the inputs into AI. We had a dedicated session and a paper on cloud computing, for example, and the way cloud computing plays into AI markets. We did a separate session and a paper on other inputs into AI, focusing on things like talent, energy, chips, data, and so on. Then you have the AI markets themselves. So the language models and the services that are provided by the big players within the section, by the newcomers in this sector, into this sector, whether to businesses or to end consumers. Finally, and this is work that we've started very recently, we look into the influence that AI has on competition in downstream markets. And you could look at it perhaps two different ways. First, where there's vertical integration. So where those firms providing AI services also play in downstream markets. But perhaps more broadly, and I would dare say personally more interestingly, we look into the way AI influence competition in many, many different sectors that in theory have nothing to do with those markets that provide the services, but will be some of them massively disrupted due to the influence of the generative AI into their businesses.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. So as you say, European Commission, et cetera, have looked at those kind of areas of the AI stack, but not necessarily in that wider approach.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because if we look at what competition agencies are doing across the world so far when it comes to AI, it is indeed mostly research. We see a lot of studies. The European Commission is one example, but there are many, many other examples out there. The UK CMA, the French Competition Authority, the Hungarians, the Portuguese, the Americans. A lot of studies, some authorities have published more than one study. What we don't see at this point so much is enforcement. There are first signs of enforcement, but for now, mostly research. I realize this is a very complicated area, and competition agencies are tasked with this very challenging mission to make sure that these markets remain competitive in times where I think the biggest experts, not in competition, in AI, do not agree on the directions that these developments are taking. So,
I guess there's been some enforcement. For example, I'm thinking of the UK and failed enforcement to an extent where they were looking at stakes taken by the large companies in the generative AI producers. As you know, they've been trying to design these stakes maybe to get around merger controls. That's the most kind of obvious.
The investment agreements that we saw.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting point that you mentioned, because it presents really well the dilemma that I think that many competition agencies are facing with at this moment. When there's a big technological leap forward like we see with AI, there's always the trade-off of intervention. Do you intervene early? And then perhaps you take a risk of kind of disrupting the innovative process that is now taking place. But if you don't intervene early, markets may get entrenched.
They may tip.
Indeed, and it might be too late. And then you say, okay, maybe let's wait. And this is the trade-off. Too late, too early. It can be too early and too late at the same time. In a sense, research that I've mentioned is a way to overcome this dilemma. Try to kind of broaden your perspective, go more into the details, trying to have a better understanding of the processes. And I think the example that you mentioned, looking into these investment agreements, is again very good example of the dilemma, because on the one hand, you want to get the maximum potential that you can get from these developments in terms of competitive markets. Obviously, when you look into what is necessary to become a big player in AI, some major incumbents have significant advantage. And as a small player, as a startup who is interested in, who has a good product and would like to get into these markets, they can find themselves in a serious disadvantage. So for example, one of the disadvantages is lack of capital. So where do you get capital? Often you need to go to the big players. So here's the trade-off. Do you allow for them to get into these agreements? And of course, when you have these interconnections, it might influence competition. But on the other hand, if they cannot get the capital, they might not get into the markets. So,
yeah, okay, interesting. And when you were looking at these other markets that were, if you like, affected, are there some key kind of areas that you identified there, or key markets of interest that you would mention?
I would just go with one. I mean, there are many, but I think the influence which on labor markets is going to be potentially stunning. We don't know yet, and you hear, I think, again, more broadly, not just in the competition context, about jobs disappearing from the market, being replaced by AI. On the other hand, we see what is called acqui-hiring, where one firm acquires another firm, actually, but having the objective in mind of getting the
just to get
talent.
The individuals.
Yes, exactly, the employees of this firm, because talent in this sector is so professional, so scarce.
Yeah.
So, just one example.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And what was your work product in that? And you mentioned the best practice roundtables. I know, I mean, you've produced hundreds of those over the years, haven't you? I've looked at them often. Because you can dig into each of the country contributions. What was your work product in this area? Was it one of those or something else?
Yeah, so we produced 4 different papers so far. One is coming soon, which will focus on agentic AI and the influence of agentic AI into this very, very complicated sphere. And this was basically it. We had 4 sessions in the competition committee to discuss these various issues. And as you were mentioning rightfully, the way we do our sessions is that we produce a paper, but we invite our members to contribute in a form of written contribution. They don't have to, but we invite them. And in this way, we provide the general overview, but if you want to have a closer look on what a particular country is doing on a particular topic, you can go into their contribution and read it and then get a very kind of broad and good perspective.
Personally, I've looked at those often. I find them very good because, as you say, you look at a particular country or the EU, and it's obviously been written by someone internally. They've looked at all of their cases, and they set out their view, and so it's a great resource in my experience.
Thank you very much, Will. I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, good. You should be. So AI is that work sounds very interesting. Anything else you'd like to mention in your recent work?
Yeah, sure. So perhaps 2 other things. We are now about to complete a 3-paper series about competition in financial markets. We had the first paper, which was focused on mobile payments, competition in mobile payment services. A second one, which was focused on the long-standing issue of relationship between competition and prudential regulation. The relationship between competition authorities and central banks are always complex. Yeah. And finally, looking forward, we'll have a paper close to the end of the year that would focus on competition in capital markets. So access to capital, the way it influences competition, and these sort of areas are a very hot topic, for example, at the moment in Europe, but also in other places.
Okay.
Second, an emerging issue. In competition policy, we've been having forever and ever, I would say, this discussion about competition and something, another important public interest.
Yeah.
For example, in recent years, we had a lot of conversation on competition and sustainability and environmental issues. Now, and there's always the need to balance between these 2 interests, and always similar questions arise on how exactly to balance, how to integrate other consideration into competition, how to influence from the competition perspective, other conversations that are taking place, other policy areas. And
that's become obviously much more up the agenda in the past maybe 2-3 years than it was for a long time.
Well, I agree and disagree at the same time. I think there was always something going on. Again, sustainability, so much has been written about and discussed about the interconnection between these two areas. But interesting now, I think, is that what we're seeing, perhaps the 2 strongest public interests that are getting into the discussion is first industrial policy, which is a big thing in many countries. I think industrial policy is in the midst of a comeback, and a very strong comeback. Yes. And there's a big question first on how, I think if you would have asked 5 years ago your usual competition official about industrial policy, they probably had in mind governments putting more money into zombie firms, often state-owned. So competition authorities had this reluctance of getting into the conversation. We did a paper on competition industrial policy 2 years ago when we showed that industrial policy is actually far more diverse. There's much more than one way to do industrial policy, and competition authorities have to take part in this conversation. As our chair, who is Benoît Couret, the chair of the French Competition Authority, like to say in this context that if you don't have a seat around the table, then you're probably on the menu. And if competition is not being considered as part of the industrial policy,
then it will be sidelined.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Second, and even more emerging, I would say, is national security. Again, if you would have asked someone 2 or 3 years ago, competition and national security, they would have looked at you and kind of wondering how much you know about competition, but it is becoming a thing. Again, with the emergence of national security and defense as a kind of public interest that many countries are paying more attention to, and again, the relationship between competition and national security. And I should say, national security is not only being seen at this point as kind of your narrow defense industry. National security has
resilience, for example.
Supply chains, energy. I think COVID pandemic kind of initiated the first change, and then geopolitics played in, the Russian invasion to Ukraine, and so on.
Yes.
So this is an emerging topic that we're going to look into soon.
So big topic, but how do you see, for example, resilience playing into competition law analysis? I mean, Olivier Gerson made a famous comment you no doubt heard about, competition being a side dish when we discuss industrial policy and these issues. So could you say in a few sentences how the best way you think that they are being looked at or should be looked at together?
So without entering the discussion over the dinner table, whether it's a side dish or a main course, maybe a dessert, I think what the point, and I'm not speaking for Olivier, but I think the point he was trying to make, and which I agree, is competition is not a full meal. You cannot
do everything.
Yes, rely only on competition to solve everything. It has to be combined and merged with other public interests, with other policy areas. And the same should go for industrial policy. And again, as I was saying earlier, it really depends how you shape industrial policy. Are you, for example, supporting players? Are you supporting objectives? So are you subsidizing a firm? Or are you subsidizing, for example, innovation more generally? So there's so much room there. There's so many different approaches you can take, and competition can definitely take a role there. Perhaps the more challenging conversation is the other way around, the way in which competition should be influenced by industrial policy. And in Europe, for example, we saw the Draghi report with some interesting observations about the way that competition should change. I think some, I would dare say, controversial ideas about, for example, concentration or the increase in concentration in certain industries and the way it may play in the creation of national champions.
Yes.
I think there's a lot that can be said about this conversation. For example, one may wonder, if you think about these multinational big firms, and take whatever firm you prefer, and you just ask yourself whether this firm reached its position through mega mergers that were approved against kind of competition perspective, or through innovation and access to capital markets. I would say it's more the second than the first.
Absolutely.
So investing more in having more pro-innovative markets would probably do more to the creation of national champions than approving anti-competitive mergers.
That must be right. I think certainly in the European and UK context, a lot of this discussion seems to come down to how you define efficiencies and the scope of efficiencies, what you can take into account when you're considering those issues, both in terms of merger control and also in kind of anti-competitive analysis or analysis of agreements. Is that how you would Is that something that lawyers should be thinking about? Is that a way to look at it? That, you know, this is an efficiencies type issue. What can you put into the efficiencies box?
Yes.
How far you can take that?
So efficiencies is an obvious gateway
Yeah.
to introduce this kind of consideration into competition policy.
Yeah.
Now, as people who do competition, we know that, for example, in the context of mergers, it hasn't been a very successful gateway, to say the least. I mean, we talk a lot about efficiencies.
To say the least, as you say.
Yeah, we talk a lot about efficiencies. It's an interesting academic topic. We in the OECD did a paper last year that was focused on efficiencies in merger control. And at the end of the day, very, very, very few mergers, anti-competitive mergers, are being improved based on efficiencies. Personally, I must say, I'm not sure why. I think there's kind of the general reluctance on authority, or I should say not reluctance, more skepticism. And I think also parties can do better job in proving their efficiencies or what they claim to be efficiencies. And perhaps there's more analytical work that should be done to clarify how this can be taken into account. But I should also say that in the end of the day, perhaps taking this conversation one level up, when you have these sort of kind of policy decisions that need to be made, when you want to balance between different public policies, there is a role also for governments and policymakers. I'm talking not in the context of a specific case or a specific merger, but generally speaking, deciding between competing public interests is the role of governments.
Yes, ultimately it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've mentioned your recent work. One thing I did notice looking in advance of this discussion was your peer reviews.
Yes.
There seemed to be a peer review. Most recent one seemed to be of Kenya.
That's true.
And they seem to have responded, if you like, positively, and said that they will try to introduce possibly some changes. Do you see those as valuable, and they've had some impact, these peer reviews that you've done?
Very much so. Yeah, this is something we really like, and it takes, I should say, a lot of courage on the side of the jurisdiction which is being evaluated, coming to the OECD saying...
Is Kenya a member, by the way? Or
no, Kenya is not an OECD member, but this is something we are happy to do to every jurisdiction who is interested. And Kenya reached out. We have many of those, by the way. We are now finalizing a peer review of Latvia, who is an OECD member. And we look very deeply. It's not a review of the competition agency. It's a review of the competition policy, law and policy, of the competition regime more generally. So we take a very, very broad look at the way a certain jurisdiction is functioning in terms of competition. Obviously, we look very closely at enforcement, merger control, advocacy, and so on. But we look also in the way competition is being integrated, if at all, into regulation, relationship. And we look at courts and the way they implement competition law. We talk to academia, we talk to private practitioners to get a very, very broad perspective. And we're very proud to see that, I also noticed Kenya's very positive response to the report that had, by the way, a few strong recommendations.
Yeah, there were criticisms.
Yeah, it was not just you're doing great, keep up the good work.
Yeah.
It was really, but also done in a constructive manner, because our purpose is to really support any jurisdiction that was interested in improving their competition regime.
Good. So before we finish here, Ori, we also like to ask you about your current. You've mentioned some of your current work and ongoing work, but anything else you'd like to mention in terms of future-looking work? Types of things that the OECD Competition Division may be thinking about going forward?
Oh, have I mentioned AI?
You mentioned AI.
Okay. So
anything else in particular?
Absolutely. So one of the
AI is not going to go away. So
No. One thing that I would like to highlight is something that we do is quite unique. We collect enforcement data from around 70 competition agencies across the world. And we publish every year a report which is called Comp Trends, which basically look into competition enforcement trend globally and try to kind of present a very broad picture of trends in enforcement. Last year in December, we published the last report. What was special about this report was that it was the first time that we analyzed 10 years of data. And the trends, even more interesting, was was the trends that we saw, which is a decline, an overall decline in the number of enforcement procedures. So we see fewer enforcement cases. Again, this is a global picture. It's an aggregated picture. It's not an individual picture. But it's something that we thought we should have a closer look at, and with the support of the competition committee and our members, we are now starting a project that will delve deeper into these numbers and try to look into the reasons for this decline in number of cases.
That was a decline looking over what period compared?
So recent 10 years, 2015 to 2025.
Okay, compared with a decline over that period,
yes.
year by year
Yes.
kind of decline. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I think you mentioned this maybe in your YouTube video, which I looked at, the closing remarks on the 2026 competition day.
Yes.
You mentioned that for the first time you'll be looking at, well, maybe this is related to that, but you said for the first time you'll be looking at case prioritization and prosecutorial discretion. So why competition regulators take cases. Is that the same issue, or is that something else?
It's slightly different, but it's a topic I'm really personally very passionate about. I mean, working 12 years for a competition authority, I know that so much is being decided not on substance, but simply on resources, on kind of priorities that you take internally. And so much is not about the cases that you take, but about the cases that you don't take.
Yes.
And then also things are sometimes not as transparent and obvious for someone looking from the outside. So I've been trying to convince our membership to pursue this topic for some time, and luckily they agreed. So we are writing a paper on this issue that should be out in 2 months. So
that is interesting, and I think it's practically relevant for private practice lawyers as well, because of course we read annual plans, we read documents which indicate where the regulators are going to focus. But part of the risk analysis when you're advising a client is, what's the likelihood of this being looked at by the regulator? Are they going to be interested in this type of case? So it has practical implications.
Absolutely, if you're advising someone considering to file a complaint.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I just wanted to ask you, we're here at the spring meeting. Have you learned anything or discovered anything particularly exciting at the spring meeting that you didn't know about before, or been to an event that you...
Well, I must say I'm always amazed coming back to DC to see the sheer size of the community that we have here, that is gathered here. I don't think there's anything like it in the world, and I can only strongly recommend anyone who has interest in competition policy in a very broad sense. You don't have to be a competition lawyer, certainly not an American competition lawyer, to enjoy the spring meeting.
So it is an extraordinary event.
Absolutely. Very much looking forward to the Enforcers Roundtable on Friday morning.
The final event normally, isn't it?
Yes. The crown jewel of the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
They keep it for last. So before we finish, we'd like to have just a brief personal comment from you. Obviously, you've had a very varied professional career, but is there anything that we wouldn't know about you that you'd like to mention? If we only worked with you professionally, do you have a particular interest or hobby that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, I'm a runner.
Okay.
And I get very fortunate because I get occasionally to travel for work. And the first thing to go into my suitcase is my running shoes. So started the morning running here around the National Mall. Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't see you. I was there as well doing that route.
You and I and several others.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
It's a very nice route. And I had my trips are usually very short because they are work focused. But if you're willing to wake up a bit earlier, it's a wonderful way to see a new place that you've never been to. So
I completely agree with that. I try to do the same. So, Ori, Mr. Schwartz, thank you very much for joining us for this discussion.
Thank you much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.